First, let me thank Senator McCain for not just working this out, but for his leadership on this issue. He has really provided, I think, the moral leadership that we need on dealing with human rights issues. He's the co-sponsor of the Sergei Magnitsky Accountability Act, and I thank him for that. Today, we close a chapter in the U.S. history on the advancing of human rights with the repeal, basically, of Jackson-Vanik. It served its purpose, and today we open a new chapter in the U.S. leadership for human rights with the Sergei Magnitsky Rule of Law Accountability Act. As you've heard, this involves a lawyer named Sergei Magnitsky, who had U.S. interests that he was representing in Russia. He discovered the largest tax fraud in Russia's history. He did what a lawyer should do. He brought it to the attention of the authorities. As a result of his bringing this corruption in local government to the authorities, he was arrested. He was tortured because they wanted him to recant what he had said. They wanted him to basically not tell the truth. He refused to do that. He needed medical attention. He was denied medical attention. And on November 6, 2009, he lost his life in a Russian prison, being denied the opportunity to get needed health care. 37 years old, a wife and 2 children. Those who were responsible for his death and those who were responsible for the cover-up have never been brought to justice. They have gone unpunished. In some cases, they've even been promoted. The facts are well known. These are not hidden facts. The international community knows the people that were involved, knows about the cover-up, and knows that they have not been held accountable. And this has gained international attention. That's why I filed legislation aimed at the individuals responsible for the Magnitsky tragedy. What it said quite clearly, that those involved would be held accountable by being denied certain international rights. It also involved those that were involved in extrajudicial killings, torture, or violations of internationally recognized human rights. The legislation said, look, we're not going to let you have the fruits of your corruption. We're going to deny you the opportunity to hold your illegal gains in our banking system, which is where they prefer. They don't want to hold rubles, they want to hold dollars. And that we will not let you have a visa, a privilege to visit our country, to visit your property in our country or your family in this country. It targets the individual who committed the gross human rights violation, and it recognizes the failure of the host country to deal with those violations. I want to thank all those who have been involved in the development of this legislation. Senator McCain has been one of the great leaders on these human rights issues. This is not a partisan division. We have strong bipartisan support. I've already acknowledged Senator Kyle, he recently spoke. I know Senator Wicker had taken the floor a little bit earlier. I thank him, the ranking member on the Helsinki Commission. I want to thank Senator Shaheen, the chair of the European Subcommittee on the Environment, on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee for her work, Senator Bob Menendez on the Foreign Relations Committee. All those were very instrumental in dealing with this. Senator Durbin, who's been our real champion on human rights. I want to acknowledge Kyle Parker, a staff person from the Helsinki Commission, who was very instrumental in the development of this legislation. And I want to also acknowledge Senator Lieberman's work. I know he'll be speaking in a few minutes. It was Senator Lieberman and Senator McCain and myself that first suggested that we should pass the Magnitsky bill. It's the right thing to do, but we certainly shouldn't let PNTR go without attaching the Magnitsky bill. And I want to thank Senator Lieberman, I want to thank Senator McCain for raising that connection. It was the right thing to do. First of all, it allowed us to get this human rights tool enacted. Secondly, I think it gave us the best chance to get the PNTR bill done in the right form. So I want to thank both of them for leadership on that. In 1974, we passed the Jackson-Vanik law. It dealt with the failure of the Soviet Union to allow for the emigration of its citizens, affecting mainly Soviet Jews. It was controversial at its time. Madam President, people said, why are we connecting human rights to trade? Why is the United States doing that? After all, trade's so important. Well, we did it and it made a huge difference. And we were able to get Soviet Jews out of the Soviet Union. We spoke for Western values in our trade legislation. We protected the rights of individuals, the refuseniks. When I first came to Congress 26 years ago, I joined the Congressional Caucus for Soviet Jewry. I wore the wristbands of refuseniks, joined by many of our colleagues. 25 years ago, I marched in Washington, a march for Soviet Jews. We stood up for basic rights, and we changed the landscape on this issue. I had a chance to be with Natan Sharansky and celebrate what he meant to people who love freedom around the world. We initiated that with Jackson-Vanik. It was a proud chapter in American history. Today, we end that chapter because Jackson-Vanik is no longer relevant to the human rights challenges of our time. But with the passage of the Sergei Magnitsky Accountability Act, we meet the challenges of our time. We meet those individuals who are committing gross human rights violation. This act is a global standard for the advancement of human rights. Unfortunately, the Magnitsky tragedy is not unique within Russia. We know other circumstances within the country. We saw the results of last year's elections and the attitude of government towards journalists. We need the protection of the Magnitsky standards for human rights violations within Russia. But, Madam President, it doesn't end with Russia. It doesn't end with Russia. Human rights violations are global, and we should have these tools available globally. We need to prevent Russia and other countries from regressing on their commitments to human rights. Now, I must tell you, when you take a look at the legislation that came out of our two committees, S-1039, coming out of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and coming out of the Senate Finance Committee, I serve on both of those committees. It says very clearly that the law would apply for those responsible for extrajudicial killings, torture, or other gross violations of internationally recognized human rights committed against individuals to obtain, exercise, defend, or promote internationally recognized human rights and freedoms, such as the freedom of religion, expression, association, and assembly, and the rights to a fair trial and democratic elections anywhere in the world. That was the legislation that we reported in two of our committees. I might tell you it was overwhelming support that we should make it global. Senator Kyle talked about that, and others I'm sure will do also. When you look at H.R. 6156, you'll see the exact language that we have in our Magnitsky bill, with one exception. Anywhere in the world's changed to Russia. Well, I'm disappointed about that, and I join with Senator Kyle in that disappointment. I think it would have been much better if we would have incorporated the international standards, the global provisions. I think it's very important Congress pass this bill. I strongly support it. I support the effort of getting this to the President as quickly as possible. But, Madam President, it's a clear message here. This bill is our standard. We will be holding countries to this standard. We will look for other opportunities to attach these provisions to other trade bills. We will look for other opportunities to reinstitute the global application of the Magnitsky standards. It's the right thing. The world is on notice. Other countries are following our leadership. We expect other countries will be acting with similar standards. And I might point out, as I did over 2 years ago, there is existing authority within the State Department to deny visas to human rights violators. Now, I think we should make that very clear, and we should enact a law that makes it clear. We've got to pass the Magnitsky law as it relates to Russia, but there is authority, and we expect that the administration will follow that authority. So I am hopeful that people understand that although the language of the law is not as broad as we would like it to be, many of us consider this to be the international standard. And we will be asking to hold other countries accountable for violators of human rights that that country does not deal with in denying them the right to visit our country or to use our banking system. One last point, Madam President. There are some who say, well, aren't we interfering with the internal affairs of a sovereign country? Nothing could be further from the truth. We have a right, I would say a responsibility to challenge internationally recognized human rights violations in other countries. It's well established. Both Russia and the United States are members of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. I had the honor of the Senate chair of the Helsinki Commission, our implementing arm. That organization gives us the right to raise human rights problems in other countries. We have used that, Madam President, to advance efforts to stop human trafficking, to deal with anti-Semitism, to deal with corruption issues in other countries. We've had that right. We have that responsibility. And our actions today are for the Russian people and for its government. I've heard from so many human rights activists in Russia, from Russian business leaders, from ordinary citizens, who tell me Russia can do better. And they urge us to move forward with the Magnitsky Accountability Act. The United States, by the passage of this bill, will be on the right side of history. It will deepen our relationship with the Russian people. Yes, Madam President, we're ending a chapter with the repeal of Jackson-Vanik, but we're starting a new chapter on human rights, one that which we can be proud of, where America, once again, is establishing a basic principle that we will not tolerate those who violate internationally recognized human rights standards. We will not let them go without being held accountable, and we certainly will not let them have the privileges of our country if they violate international recognized human rights standards.